I think that's pretty easy for me. It would be the younger son, the one who left. Um, and it really isn't a story of going off and sowing wild oats or anything like that. But when I first moved over here, I was a young single guy, and actually was invited to, well, first of all, my first Sunday here, I came to Westside. It was the bigger church in town, and of course I knew no one in Russellville, and some of the first people I met, Jim, Bob, and Betty Humphrey, were, at the time, their kids were pretty little, and got to meet them. They took me out to lunch and that, and Westside was a little bigger church, though, than I was used to going to. And a week or two into my job, Les Howard called me up, and he worked at the plant where I was, and invited me to the little church that he and Denise were going to, Interstate Church of Christ. And it was more to my size, or more to my liking, and really friendly, and really a lot of great folks went to church there.
Cute girls.
Cute girls. That's where I met Carol. As things were, as the church years went on, there were not really much growth going on in the church, and I think things started to get a little bit tense. And I remember one meeting where things got very tense, something I'd never really experienced in my life of going to church. And after that, our preacher left, who had been, I think, a very positive influence. We really thought a lot of them, he and his wife, and it just, the church started to decline.
So when problems started happening at Interstate and things started to go a direction that didn't feel right, I didn't have anything to fall back on. And I think that put both of us kind of in a bad place, because neither one of us we didn't have any reserve. We didn't have anything to lean back on. Daryl's history, his mom was very spiritual and took the kids to church. And I've heard people say that, I loved going to church when I was growing up, and I loved being a part of it, and nobody ever had to make me go to church, and that wasn't my experience. I wouldn't have gone if I'd had a choice. I would have stayed home. I would have done something different. I would have gone to another church maybe. But honestly, had I not met Daryl when I did, I would have left the Church of Christ.
We reached a point where we didn't have any kids, and reached a point where it was just didn't seem like it was worth it, I guess is the best way to say it. And we left, but we didn't leave and go somewhere else. We just left. We were talking about it, and don't remember how long it was, but we weren't going to church anywhere. So we were the classic, I was the classic apathetic Christian, if those two words can be used together. I never really thought about it, other than thought about the fact that, I'm not a bad person. I'm pretty good. I don't do bad things. Didn't really see any difference in myself away from church as I did at church. And so there was really no motivation in my life to go back. So I think of the story of the prodigal son. He reached that low point where he realized that, life was better back home. It took a little longer for me to realize what was missing. The night that we came forward or placed membership at Westside, came back, and there was just a tremendous outpouring of love and people coming up. And so that was probably the one thing, as I think of the story of the prodigal son, that we got to see, in a way, the joy of the Father in that story. And so I've always thought of that as we got to see maybe a glimpse of what God felt by the people who were here that night and came up to us.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Westside. We're so excited that you're here today. I want to say Happy Easter to you. We are going to be looking at the story of the prodigal son this morning in Luke chapter 15. So if you've got a Bible, if you want to open that up there and be looking through that as we talk about it and as we worship this morning and hear people share their stories, that's where we're going to be. But if you're here today and you don't have a Bible, that's okay. We're just really glad that you chose to be here today. I want to highlight 3 things about this passage in Luke chapter 15 that you just have to know as we get going this morning. And here is the first one. It's in the first couple verses of Luke, the 15th chapter. And we haven't read this, but we've got to know why Jesus even tells this story. So if you got your Bible open in front of you, look in Luke chapter 15 and the first couple verses there. Luke says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So Jesus is eating with some people that the religious leaders think are shady characters. And in response to that, Jesus tells 3 stories. He tells a story about a lost coin. He tells a story about a lost sheep. And then he tells a story about a lost son. And the last story of the lost son is what we've read so far. And so Jesus tells these 3 stories in response to the criticism that he receives from the religious leaders about who he should and shouldn't spend his time with. And so essentially, Jesus is going to give an explanation for why he's sitting at this table and why he's eating with these people. That's the first thing you got to see. Now, the second thing I want you to see is in verse 15. In this story, as Jesus tells it in verse 15, he says, "So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country." He's talking about the son who decided to leave, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now understand what's going on here. Jesus, who is Jewish and is talking to a group of Jewish people, he tells a story about a son who leaves his country and he goes and he's working for a Gentile. And not only is he working for a Gentile, he's working with an unclean animal, a pig. And not only is he working with unclean animals, he wants to eat the food that unclean animals eat. And so as Jesus tells the story, what he wants the people who are listening to understand is there is not a lower place for this boy to get to. This is rock bottom, without question. That's the second thing you got to see. Now the third thing I want you to see is in verse 20. When Jesus tells what happened, he says, "So he got up and went to his father," that's the son who left, and watch how the father responds. And Jesus just lays it on thick. He says, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." What you got to see here in this story is the lavish love of the father to his son. I can't help but think as I read the story when it says that he saw him while he was a long way off. We're not told this in the story, but I just wonder how many days the dad sat on his property and looked to the horizon and didn't see his son. But he's looking for him. It says that he saw him while he was a long way off, and he runs to him. I'm told that running for a man in the Middle East was a very just undistinguished thing to do. And so he literally runs to him. He hugs him. He cries with him, and he kisses him. What Jesus wants us to see in telling this story, what he wants the people to see who he originally told the story to, is the incredible, lavish love of the Father. And so let's think on that as we continue to worship this morning.
You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace when my fear is crippling. You are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting. Oh, I'm running to your arms, the riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light up the world, forever reign. You are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, all creation will proclaim. You are here, in your presence I'm made whole. You are God, all else I'm letting go. And oh, I'm running to your arms, the riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, 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 I'm running to your arms, the riches of your